Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director of the Broome County Council of Churches. Polarized is one word that would best describe the current political situation that we are in. We have people on both sides of the political spectrum who are bemoaning the fact that the other side just doesn't seem to listen to them. To help us kind of discover a little bit about how we might be able to get beyond this polarization that's in our current politic, I've invited a couple of guests to be with us. They've written a book. It's called Polarized: The Collapse of Truth, Civility, Community, and How We Can Find Common Ground. The authors are Dr. Paris Donehoo and Dr. Keith Parsons. Both of whom are with us today. So welcome to Encounter, Paris.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. So
that's a very provocative title, Polarized, the collapse of truth, civility, and community, and how we can find common ground. And that kind of gets played out as the three benchmarks, if you want to call them that, for how the book is kind of divided and discussed. So how did you all get to the point where you wanted to talk about this book? Where did this book germinate from?
Well, actually it started, well, go ahead, Paris.
Well, that's all right. You have to understand, Keith and I are old friends, and when we say old, we mean old.
Literally.
We met in the first grade, so our friendship has lasted that long. And both of us are from Georgia. We were raised in the Atlanta area, and once a year at Christmas time, Keith and I come back from our respective exiles, me in Illinois and him in Texas, back to Georgia to see family, and we always get together during that time for lunch or for dinner. And it's usually a lot of laughter and cutting up and reminiscing and sharing Monty Python lines and all that sort of stuff. But when we got together after the election of 2016, our mood was much more subdued, and we talked about how we felt about it and what we might be able to contribute to the whole situation. And one of us, I'm not sure who did, but one of us said, well, maybe we ought to write a book together. And, those bells and whistles went off. And so we started working on it. And the book that you have is the result of that. Is that about the way you remember it, Keith?
Yeah, absolutely. We were meeting over some delicious Cajun food. And, we were, terribly depressed by the recent events, the election of Donald Trump. And so, we commiserated, and then we decided to do something about it and to use our literary talents to see if we could address what we regarded as the salient issues.
Now, one of the things that I found really fascinating about reading your relationship was that it started over a kickball game.
It started over mutual antipathy to kickball.
Exactly. And you ended up finding each other inside the woods while you were trying to hide from everybody else.
That's exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. Unsuccessfully, of course.
Yeah, so they found you and they dragged you back into the kickball game. How did that game end, by the way?
I don't know. They stuck me in. Whenever we played games like that, they stuck me out in right field where I stood around daydreaming and hoping that nothing ever came my way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of that.
We would have probably found each other that way, just being out in right field together.
Yeah. Well, and some of the ensuing, like even when you were talking about your relationship, you would talk about like the radio program that you all put together and the imaginative kind of quality to, the way that you all even interacted with each other. You're probably, astronauts, or maybe one of you was an alien, the other one was the astronaut. I don't know how you played, but it seems like this would be right up your alley as far as how you interact with each other. And And it comes across too in your book when you both are, you're talking, and even though you come from, and maybe this would be a place for us to begin talking, is like, where do like, as far as polarized and the way that it kind of plays itself out, one of you is a theologian, the other one of you is what you would call a naturalistic atheist. And yet you find common ground in relationship to each other. So do you want to talk a little bit about who is who and how this kind of gets put together into a book? So I'd just like you to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a naturalist. Atheism is, I guess you would say, an implication of naturalism. A naturalist is someone who thinks that all events in the physical universe have physical causes. I don't positively deny the existence of non-physical things. I mean, there could be, numbers, sets, possibilities, maybe even Platonic ideas. All right. But I do think that I do say that everything that happens in the universe and all agents, everything that can do anything is a natural thing, a physical thing, so that everything that occurs ultimately has a physical explanation. Everything from a supernova to a transient thought has a physical cause and explanation. And so that rules out all supernatural agents, not just gods, but ghosts and goblins and any other sort of putative supernatural agent gets ruled out. So, yeah, I deny the existence of the theistic God, but that's just one of many things I deny.
Right, and of course, Paris, you come out on the theistic part, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how would you typify your experience?
Well, I've made quite a journey with this myself. I was raised in a very conservative Christian environment.
And Keith was raised similarly, right?
Yeah,
I was a Presbyterian.
I
occasionally would visit Paris at his church, where pretty much it was the same message that the Baptists preached. The Baptists preached the same message as the Presbyterians, but they were a little bit louder in how they said it, and that was the main difference as far as I could tell.
Right.
Pretty much it. And so, but early on, I began to start to question some of the perspectives that I had been given. I was very fortunate in that I had wonderful parents who, even though they were conservative, they encouraged me to think for myself, which during my teenage years caused not a small amount of consternation for my dad. But I'm very grateful to that. And I had a wonderful pastor who encouraged the same thing. And so all along, I had this kind of bent that didn't go along with the kind of restrictive perspective that I had, that everyone expected me to have. So as the years went along and I, continued my education and study and reading, a whole entirely different approach began to take shape for me. There was a time when I would have echoed the old saying, well, the Bible says it, I believe it, and that settles it. I eventually came to the place to where I'd say, the Bible is true, and some of it actually happened. Quote I got from Marcus Borg, because I began to understand that truth is not one-dimensional.
Right.
It's multi-layered. There's truth and then there's truth. So, but I never had the sense that there was not a being, that there was not a God that I could know in Jesus that was not involved in my life. It's been said that you see the hand of God most clearly in retrospect, and I can say that from my own perspective. It's been said, some people say, well, I won't believe it until I see it. I think now the real truth is, I won't see it until I believe it. I think faith is a choice, just like non-faith is a choice. And when we make one choice or the other, we begin to see the world around us through those eyes and through that lens. And what I find fascinating about my my relationship with Keith is that although we come at things from entirely different starting points, especially as we grew up and got out of those years where we felt like we had something to prove to each other, we began to see an awful lot of commonality
Right.
and values that we had. We just came at them from different perspectives. I found I had more in common with my atheist friend Keith than I did with some people who be my brothers and sisters in Christ, which I just find incredibly joyful, to tell you the truth. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
Sure.
where I'm coming from.
And it seemed like through the book, you all shared a mutual admiration for each other as far as like even the content of your writing. I mean, you would often begin reflecting on what the other had said in the previous part of the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes across as, even though you are somewhat different, you have mutual admiration for each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was a great pleasure for me to read each of Paris's writings there. And he is a terrific writer, by the way. He writes in an extremely vivid way. I'm sure that's from giving years of sermons. He and I are both both have the job of keeping people awake and making them listen to us. Okay, I as a professor and he as a minister, so we both have to, put a bit of levity in what we say. But Paris is very good at it. One of the things that he does is, like any good Southern preacher, he's got a wealth of wonderful stories to illustrate every point he makes. So whenever he makes a point, he can tell a story that is often hilarious, but also right on the nose. And so that's one of the things that makes reading him such a pleasure. Of course, I being a professor, I have to avoid becoming pedantic at times, but Paris helps keep me on track.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about the collapse of truth, where you begin your book, and maybe begin with Keith talking a little bit about what is truth, and maybe how truth has collapsed in your understanding of it.
Yeah, well, I disagree with many philosophers who have written many thick books on the nature of truth. I think we all know pretty much what truth is. Aristotle said 2,400 years ago that truth is saying of what is, that it is, and of what it is not, that it is not. So simply, it seems to me that truth is telling it like it is. And I don't think we need a tremendously deep, arcane, esoteric theory to tell us what truth is. We know what truth is. We recognize it. And, we also know, well, I guess a much more interesting question to me is not what is truth, but what is untruth? How do you lie? How are the many ways, the innumerable ways that you can disguise truth? There's just plain flat out lying, just barefaced, bald-faced lying, which is what Donald Trump does. I mean, he doesn't even attempt to dissemble or spin or hide it. He just goes right out and says whatever falsehood pops into his mind at the moment because it makes him feel good to say it. George W. Bush, on the other hand, in his presidency, they were masters of spin. Spin is a very interesting phenomenon. Spin is when you can say something that has the superficial appearance of truth and may even contain a few items that are technically true. But the ultimate effect is to absolutely lie and to mislead even more than a lie would. So all those things, make it quite fascinating. The kinds of subterfuge we have. Lies have been weaponized. There are people who devote their lives, indeed entire companies that devote their lives to coming up with more effective lies that they can sell to their clients. So, lying and untruth is a big deal these days. Very interesting.
And that's kind of interesting to me because, in some of the work that the works that Paris cites in his long bibliography, and both of you have quoted quite extensively in there.
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about propaganda and how it operates within the world. And there was you quote from like Stanley Hauerwas and Will Williman's books quite significantly in your understanding of how the church operates and other kinds of stuff. So how would truth from a Christian perspective kind of refute at times the propaganda that we see kind of used, like the spin that Keith is talking about, or the untruths that we see at work in the world?
Well, I contend that the church at its best, and you and I both know that sometimes that's rare.
Yeah.
But the church at its best can be a community of discernment and a community of encouragement and challenge that basically says, we have this tradition that has been handed down to us for all these thousands of years. And so we're going to work together to try and make sure that each one of us stays true to the truth, if you want to put it that way. So if somebody's beginning to, like Fred Craddock said, wander off onto the dark side of Nahum, then there are people in the church that bring him back and say, no, that's not the way we operate. That's not what we do. I don't know if I mentioned it in the book or not, but in my college days, I got all excited about going off to this other school, and my pastor and my parents did some digging and found out that the place wasn't even accredited, and it would just stunt my personal growth and my educational experience and everything else. And I was really upset that they did that. Now I'm just thrilled that they did that, particularly my pastor.
Right.
My parents, when you're 18, they don't know anything to start with. But I had high respect for my pastor, and when he said, no, you don't want to do this, I listened to him. That's just one small example. And so the church can be that kind of community. In the larger sense of the nation that we belong to, there used to be what have been called guardrails that operated the same way, that everybody knew when you went outside of those guardrails, when you climbed over those guardrails. The problem, as I see it now, is that either the guardrails have broken down, or we have so many people in leadership position, and it's not just Trump, but so many people in leadership positions who are willing to just disregard those guardrails, and yet the community does not come back and say, no, that's going too far.
Right.
And so you've got now a situation where not that untruths are out there, the lies are out there, and either people have convinced themselves that it's not, that's the truth, or they just don't care. And that's the part that scares me the most. A friend of mine was telling me about an aunt of his who lives in a rural area here in Illinois. He went to see her, and she wasn't wearing a mask anywhere she went. And he asked about it, and she said, oh, that's just all made up.
Yeah.
That's just all a hoax, Well, how do you, how do you deal with that when people just, they believe the lies, or they don't care about the lies?
Right.
And, I think that's one of the places that the church can be particularly helpful by modeling. This is the kind of community that we can be. We can be a community of truth that holds one another accountable for truth.
Yeah, I was watching Dr. Fauci's. He was on Facebook talking with a group of Georgetown students, and one of the students that he was talking with was in public health, and she was talking about her her perspective, and she brought up the fact, the question that she brought up was, how do we keep public health from being politically divisive? Because right now, public health is, if you wear masks, then you must be from the left. If you don't wear masks, you must be from the right. And so it's become a politically charged thing. And Fauci said, well, we need to be committed to science. And by being committed to science and just keeping with the facts, that we can somehow rise above the current political divide. However, when you have one side that is, in your words, Paris, who's tearing down the guardrails, and they're saying that the guardrails don't matter anymore. How do you, and maybe this would be best answered by Keith, because you were talking a lot about truth at that point, but how do you get people to be taught thinking about rationally about the truth when they've been so encumbered by that spin and the lies and the ways that it's being tearing down those guardrails?
Well, it's a particularly difficult problem because how do you use rational argument to convince people who plug up their ears and refuse to listen to rational argument? Maybe one thing with the pandemic that we're in right now is one hopes that people will eventually, maybe when reality comes up and bites you on the bum, especially hard, you have to acknowledge reality eventually and realize that the only real hope that we have in dealing with some problems is to actually listen to the people who know something. Don't go to your internet echo chamber. Don't go sit in your bubble, okay? Actually listen to the people who actually know something. But, there has been such a denigration of science and expertise in our society. I consider this to be perhaps the single most alarming development, sociological development that I have seen in my lifetime. When I was a kid, scientists were heroes. All right. When I was a kid, 8, 9, and 10 years old, every intelligent kid wanted to be a scientist. All right. And science was a thumbs up word for both liberals and conservatives. But what we have now, of course, is the radical politicization of science, so that where you stand on scientific issues becomes an indicator of your ideology. And I think that's just a terrible, terrible thing that you have. But they used to say that we have a culture war in this country. We no longer have a culture war. We have a war between intelligence and stupidity. And I'm afraid that stupidity is often winning right now. And stupidity wins every time somebody dismisses what the people who have PhDs in the field have. When people dismiss that and just say it's a hoax, then stupidity is winning. The problem is the stupidity will kill you. All right. And maybe when people start getting killed in large numbers due to stupidity, eventually, it'll dawn upon them that, gee, maybe those doctors and scientists and PhDs actually know something. That's my hope anyway.
It's a good hope to have.
I'm not sure it's realistic. So the capacity that some of these people have for denying reality is just astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, I think one of the saddest facets of this current pandemic that we're in, at least in the United States, is how the tenor of it has changed over these months. Do you remember in the beginning, there was all of this, well, we're in this together, we can make it through this, we can pull together and all this sort of stuff. And there was so much of that out there, and people helping people. And, even for crying out loud, even the Congress, got together for once and passed those bills. Yes, they're fraught with problems and all that sort of stuff, but they were there because they said we need to help one another. Now it's become totally partisanized, just absolutely partisan, and so we have to, and all of that's gone.
Well, we have 1 minute left. I can't believe that.
Yeah.
So I'm, we have a lot of that book, and there's a lot of book there that we could kind of make our way through. But what are some ways forward, Keith, that you can lay out for us in the last minute?
Some ways forward. I think the thing to do is to, really listen when people say things, even when people say things you don't want to hear, especially when people say things you don't want to hear. I wrote an essay recently titled, What Can an Old White Man Say About Racism? And I'm an old white man, and what can I say about racism? Well, when people of color say something, I've got to listen to them, especially if they're saying something I don't want to hear.
Right. And that would be an important thing. And I, in your book, you also talk about reading people from different perspectives. So we would read like Krugman, and we would also read George Will, and we would need to make sure that we're conversant in both things, and that maybe the best way is like in debate, the best way that you can even know what you're up against is by being able to articulate the opposing view to the point where you know it as well as they do. And then you can begin to enter into some type of dialogue. And I think that was a really important insight I got from both of your use of Monty Python, which I love. The holy hand grenade scene made it into your book, as well as the hermits.
Yeah, right.
I really did enjoy both of those things. Really good book. I would recommend it to anybody that wants to read it. It's called Polarized: The Collapse of Truth, Civility, and Community, and How We Can Find Common Ground. My guests have been the Dr. Paris Donehoo and Dr. Keith Parsons, the authors of that book. Want to highly recommend. You can get it from Amazon. I downloaded it and read it in about 3 days. It was, and I didn't spend all of my time in those 3 days reading it, but it was a really, really good book. I thought it was very entertaining. The stories are amazing. And both of you did an excellent job with each of your parts. So thanks for being on Encounter. And to all of you who are watching, I ask that you would have a good day and be gentle and kind to each other.